Okay, so we are moving on into Module 12. Module 12 is going to be largely about unemployment. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab my coffee. It's going to be largely about unemployment and kind of defining what unemployment is, what makes someone unemployed, what makes them employed. And we're going to kind of explore why the unemployment rate, as it is referred to in the news and the numbers that you typically see, might be understated. In other words, that it might be a little bit greater than what we might be led to believe in the news and in the media. So let's get into that. And we will start by talking about defining and measuring unemployment itself. Let's talk about the labor force. What is the labor force? The labor force is going to be everyone who is eligible to work or that can work, and that is going to be two groups of people. That is both going to be the employed people out there as well as the unemployed. So it's going to be employed plus unemployed people to be part of the labor force. You do not have to be employed to be part of the labor force. This includes people who are looking for work as well. So what constitutes being employed? Well, you got to work at least 1 hour per week. You have to work at least 1 hour per week. That is the minimum qualification. And let's see, if you are unemployed, that means you must be not working. In other words, you can't be working, but you also must be seeking work. So in other words, you can't be just sitting on your couch, right? You can't be sitting on your couch, sitting in your mother's basement, and not working for work or not looking for work and considering yourself and be part of that unemployment statistic. You must be actively looking for work, and whether that is websites, going out and giving applications, whatever the case may be, you must be actively looking for work. If you're not actively looking for work, you are not unemployed, and you are also not in the labor force. Defining and measuring unemployment. Continued. Labor force participation rate. And let's just move through this. Labor force participation rate, that's going to be the labor force over the civilian population. That's essentially trying to figure out, okay, who do we have that are unemployed and employed people? Let's figure out who is either working or actively seeking for work, and figure that out in relation to the entire civilian population over the age of 16 years old. And you multiply that times 100, and you calculate that as a percentage. Unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is going to be unemployment over the labor force. Unemployment over the labor force. So unemployment over the labor force. Unemployment rate today, it's a little bit less. I think it's about 3.7% or so. And as we said before, that's a bit understated because there's factors that go into that that might not be ideal for people. Okay, and I'll get into what I mean by that. That, in other words, they may have work, but that might not be the best work for them, right? And so, can you really consider them employed? Well, technically, yes, but in reality, when it comes to meeting that certain standard of living, perhaps not. Unemployment during a recession. What happens? What happens is going to be that firms are going to produce less. Okay, firms are going to produce less, essentially because people are buying less. Firms produce less because people are buying less. There's not a need to produce more goods. If you do, you're going to end up with all sorts of surplus, and for a firm, that is not a good situation. And people in a recession, by definition, are not buying as much because there's not as much money to spend. On average, don't have as much money to spend. Few customers, in other words, there are going to be few customers. So what do firms need if there's fewer customers? If you're running a store and you've got fewer customers filtering into your store, what changes are you going to make? Well, you might lower prices, but then you're not getting as much profits. So you've got to cut out something. Well, one of the things you can cut out is the number of employees you have, or maybe even employee hours if you feel bad about cutting employees. But the fact of the matter is that you need less workers. Firms need less workers because they have fewer customers. Other issue: workers end up getting laid off as a result of this. Because they need less workers, you have workers get laid off. And then what happens to unemployment after that? It goes up. So unemployment then rises. Unemployment rises after that. Weakening economy shows up as a rising unemployment. So a weakening economy shows up as rising unemployment. That's one of the bellwethers for figuring out when we might be going into a recession. If unemployment begins to rise, well, we might be headed that direction. It's also one of the last things to correct itself after a recession, okay? And there's plenty of reasons for that, okay? People don't get hired back until late in the game, and the reason is because many owners are reacting and they're judging, okay, hey, are things truly getting better? Are we truly getting more money as a retailer? If so, I might be able to get a few more people on staff. Okay. When a college graduate is only able to find work in a coffee shop, okay, so for example, if he has a degree in business and he's serving as a barista, then is that the best type of employment for him? The answer is no. He would prefer to be getting relevant work experience, and a barista is not that. So given that, we would call him underemployed. Okay, that example, underemployed in that case. What does it mean to be underemployed? It also means having hours cut. Okay, if you want a certain number of hours that are full-time, if you want full-time hours and you're only getting part-time, then you are underemployed. Okay, you can work 1 hour per week. Are you employed? Yes, but is that an ideal situation for you? No. Okay, and so when politicians, when the media talks about the unemployment rate, they're not really. It's not really telling us what the full picture is. In other words, it makes it look better because you have these people who are in situations that are not ideal for them, that are technically underemployed, but wouldn't be counted towards unemployment. Discouraged workers. These are people who have essentially given up looking for work, and but the reason behind that is because they have unsuccessfully searched for a job. And so essentially they've gone out, they've looked, and they've said, market's not so good for working right now. I'm not even going to try. Okay, I'm not even going to try. That's the situation there. Okay. So what is the relationship between unemployment and GDP? What would you imagine? Is this a positive or a negative relationship? We've done enough graphs by which we can probably figure this out at this point, but would this be a positive or a negative relationship? Well, we see with the trend, negative sloping, that's going to be a negative relationship excuse me, between economic growth and unemployment. And why is that? Well, you've got labor resources and you're not fully utilizing all those resources. So how can you grow, right, as a country if you're not using all your labor resources? It can't happen. This is a problem that you might see on a test. If I were to give you these figures and I told you to calculate unemployment, okay, if I told you to calculate, let's do labor force participation rate first. Looking back at your formula for labor force participation rate, how would you calculate this? Pause the video, look back at that formula if you don't remember it, and see if you can come up with the percentage. Okay, let's see if you were correct. So for labor force participation rate, what are you using? Well, you're going to use labor force over what? You're going to use labor force over the civilian population. Okay, so if you do that, what you end up with is a percentage along 63.5. If you didn't have your calculator, not the biggest deal. As long as you knew this number went over top of this number, we should be good to go. I'll give you a very solvable number on a test or a quiz. What about unemployment rate? How do we calculate unemployment rate? How do we calculate unemployment rate in this case? Pause the video, see if you can figure out what two numbers go together for calculating unemployment rate. $12,544, so that's going to be your unemployment, okay? And then here you're using the size of the total civilian labor force, okay? That's the formula we used before. It's going to be high. It's going to be 8.1%, which is a tad high. Okay? That's what we did for that's our stuff for Module 12. Module 13, we'll get into a little bit more about the causes and the categories of unemployment.